Hello, I'm Kenny from Malbot here today to share with you an interview I did with Johnny Derango, the DP of the film FATMAN, which is about a more grizzled Kris Kringle and the child who sends an assassin after him. It is available for rental right now on like Amazon or wherever you rent your movies, and it's out on Blu-ray on the 26th, which that's what, on January 26th, 2021. I'm going to be getting that because I like special features. But before you can get special features, you can get this interview. So, it's kind of a meandering talk we did over Zoom, but, we talk about the theory of the shoot, of the cinematography, the kind of, the vibe, the feel that he was going for, a little bit of gear talk, get off topic a little bit, some fun set stories, the usual movie interview thing. I was thinking that I could do a bunch of these if you enjoy it. So if you do enjoy it, please let me know in the old comments, and I will pursue more people to interview. But if you don't like it, don't say anything. That's fine. There's also, if you go to provideocoalition.com/KennyMC, you'll get my author page, and you can see not only the transcript, a sort of condensed transcript of this video, but everything else I've written there as well. I'm sure some of you will find it valuable. I hope. But enough from me. Please enjoy this interview with cinematographer Johnny Derango.
Hi, I'm Johnny Derango, and today I'm here to talk about the cinematography of FATMAN.
So to start, talk to me about your collaboration with your gaffer.
Yeah, so
And who is he?
My gaffer, I have a gaffer by the name of Mateo Gonzalez, great guy. We've done 2 features together now and a bunch of short form content. He's a really smart guy, and we just have a really amazing shorthand. So ideally what happens is you go in and you do a location scout, a tech scout, and you get things figured out, and you talk through it on the day of the tech scout. And right. Obviously not always the case. Sometimes there's curveballs and you have to be prepared. So when you're going through those locations, you're deciding what's going to be the best units based on what you're planning on doing, mostly based on like what time of day you're shooting. I'm really concentrating on the characters and the story and how I can bridge that with my lighting and my camera movement. So what I'm looking for on a location scout is interesting angles, interesting placement of windows where, sometimes there may be just a single lamp that you look at and you go, okay, that could be an amazing just single source for this scene. So I'm taking all that stuff into account as I'm looking at it. I'm trying to figure out what's best going to work for the vision. On this, with Chris's house, I wanted to have this really great homey feel. I wanted it to be his safe place, the one place that you always felt comfortable in. So when I was sort of designing the lighting on that in the tech scout, we talked about it, and I wanted like a nice soft wrap. So what we decided we would do is we would push light through the windows, a real soft diffused light that felt natural coming in the windows, and then we would do small sources within the room to have some background pops, some bokeh in the background, some things like that. We also had fireplaces inside that we knew we would have on, and we'd have the flicker of the fire too. So in crafting that, we decided we were going to need some bigger units to place outside, which we eventually popped into 12 by ultra bounces outside of all the windows. And then we got this beautiful soft...
Because the house was a location,
The house was
right?
a location. It was the second floor. So that's another thing you have to be careful of as you're scouting. You got to figure out if you need condors, if you need lifts of any kind. You have to decide where those lights are going to be placed. Sometimes you're coming down from above on a lift with your lights underslung so that there's no stands or anything's out. The way we adjusted our angles in this, we were able to come straight up on stands with the 12 bys and hit them in a way that it pushed the light in on the right angle we wanted without seeing outside. There was also some window coverings and things like that. But those are the things that I'm looking for. I want to know, am I going to have to black out the natural light behind my big pushes that are coming in because the time of day is going to be shifting? Am I ever going to get the sun coming in on an off axis that's going to compete with what I'm doing? So you got to take all that stuff into account and say, okay, do I have the firepower to overpower the natural light? Is the natural light going to create a problem at any point? And, based on that, you have to make decisions. And you try to make those decisions as far in advance. Like I said, sometimes you get thrown a curveball and you're showing up day of and you're like, okay, this is what I got. This is what is on the camera or on the grip electric truck. And this is what we're going to do to make it work.
Yeah. So you were saying you were putting 12 bys up behind the lights. What were those wrapped with?
So those were ultra bounce.
Okay.
So we, black side of the sun, bright side shining in. It does a little bit of double duty.
Yeah.
Bounces stray light back, pushes the good light in.
And so that was just to simulate the sunlight outside the windows and
just a nice soft ambient push from all sides. Yeah, just to give a nice wrap to the characters on the inside and make it just feel real nice and homey. That was something that was really important. There's 3 very distinct characters in this movie, and they needed to have their own distinct lighting and lensing. And so that was something that I really concentrated on. With Mel, it was always soft wrapping light, very, very traditional, very classic film light. So that again, I was very careful to, in conversations with my gaffer, talk about soft as possible. We did a lot of like snap grid type egg crate stuff with chimeras, that kind of thing, direct the light, very soft light into where we wanted it. Because we're in really small environments and I never wanted that light spilling all around the place. For all intents and purposes, it's a thriller and I wanted to maintain that feel. So even though it's soft wrapping light, there's still contrast all over the place.
To get this sort of hominess of the interior of Chris's house, like what were some of the things that you did to achieve that?
I wanted all the exteriors to have a little bit more of an icy blue, but I wanted that inside of that house to always carry a warmth. There was a time where I thought about, even playing that sort of icy blue in through the windows and keeping his house nice and warm on the inside. And it was something that I tested, and in testing, I just found out it just sort of overpowered the environment. It didn't feel right to the character, so I stuck with the warmth at all points in his house. Yeah. The only time we feel the iciness is when he's outside in it. Especially the morning he comes home from delivering the presents, and you have a very blue early dawn look.
The contrast you got outside in the snow is amazing. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, that was really interesting because that was actually day 1 of shooting. So talking about being thrown right into the fire, we got Mel, we're outside, we're in freezing weather, we're trudging through snow that once you track through it, it's blown. Like, we had to be really careful where we walked. So I couldn't always get the gear that I wanted in, but right. In that scene that you're talking about in particular, I was able to, Mel is facing the camera, he's got his gun up, pointed almost directly at camera. To camera left, I was able to bring in some diffusion to break up the natural sun, just to soften, to get it a little wrappier. Yeah. And then because we're in, something like this, I was able to bring in negative fill from the right, and I walked it up pretty close to the edge of frame. So you get this really nice contrast. It still feels like natural sunlight coming through because whatever the diffusion I used, I know, can't remember off the top of my head what I used, but I went pretty light on it. So you still have that direct sun feel.
Sure.
And Mel's got such an amazing face. And if you start to soften it up too much, you lose a little bit of that character.
Right.
So, and production design cannot be underestimated. You can light the most beautiful scene in the world, but if it's in a white room, it doesn't matter. You gotta have elements that especially with his homestead and inside of his house, it had to have this sort of weathered, lived-in feel to it. He's a character who's been around for thousands of years. He's been married for, who knows, hundreds or thousands of years. Yeah. It just needed to feel lived in. And we found a tremendous location. So the location, along with Chris August, who was our production designer, did an excellent job. His production design and the lighting that fit the environment, it just all came together. And so you can, like I said, you can light the most beautiful scene in the world, but if you don't have those other elements in play, it's never going to look as good as it does when everything comes together. And I think in this project, all those elements were in play.
Lights, practical lights, that's production design. That's not necessarily 100%. Cinematography, but you guys got to really work together to make that a thing.
I'm a big fan of practical units, and we were doing... In Billy's house, I really wanted there to be a lot of lamps and a lot of practicals because I wanted it to feel like it was sourcing from somewhere. I wanted to use the windows and I wanted to use the lamps. Right. I wanted everything to feel very motivated. And again, with his lighting too, I wanted it soft because I wanted to tie him to Mel's character through the soft wrapping lighting. And there was a time when I kept requesting lamps and I kept asking lamps to be put in different spots. And I think it was the set dresser, somebody goes, "Looks like a fucking lamp store in here." And I just lost my shit.
To be fair,
I was like,
the lamp section of Home Depot is the best part of Home Depot.
100%.
I just love walking
100%.
through it and just...
You and me both.
Yeah.
I get transfixed. I go and I get stuck pressing the buttons to see the different color temperatures. Yeah. Yep. But it was one of these things where I'm like, okay, it might look like a lamp store to you because you're looking at it all at once, but the angles I'm going to pick, the way I'm going to set it up, it's going to be very targeted. You're going to get the bokeh of things falling off in the background. It's not like I'm seeing 16 lamps in one shot. Just trust me, it's going to look great.
Yeah.
And I think they were just messing with me, but yeah, it looks great,
Yeah. I know you shot the mini LF on this one.
Part of the reason for using the LF for me was I wanted to differentiate the characters through the lensing. With Mel, I wanted to physically place the camera closer to him, use a little bit wider angle lenses for the close-ups. I knew we were going to be in some really tight, practical locations. And I wanted them, like I said, to feel homey, but I never wanted them to feel claustrophobic.
Talk about the lens choice. Like what did you go with? You went with the signature primes?
I shot everything on the Arri DNA primes. They're Arri's proprietary primes. Yeah, which are made up of all old glass. They don't tell you what glass it's made up of, but it's cobbled together of all these different lenses in modern day. Yeah, in modern day housings. And they're great. They've got a lot more character than more modern lenses. I tested a lot of lenses, and I tested some beautiful lenses. I mean, I tested signatures, tested Supremes. I took a look at S4s because S4s are, one of my favorites. And they remind me more of the S4s than any of the modern lenses. They have S4s tend to skew a little more yellow, which I like. Especially, I shot Small Town Crime on the S4s, and I love the way that looks, and it fit really well with that film. Now they're not as yellow. They skew warm, but not as much as the yellow side. So across the line, I think they have a little more warmth to them, and they definitely have more character, especially some of them towards the edges.
So interiors, you were mostly using practicals with the sort of outside big old bounce source coming in.
Yeah, if I needed more of a zippy edge light or something like that, I was using the Arri L5s and the L7s, which are their LED Fresnels.
Yeah.
And they're awesome because they're not very big. I remember tucking them up. Like we had in Chris's bedroom, there was like a dresser, and I think I remember just like a C-stand arm flat on the top of the dresser, extended off with an L7, right up against the ceiling.
Yeah. And
you get a nice edge for separation. So you get that nice soft wrapping light and then a little harder edge that plays as more direct sun coming through the window.
Totally. And then I remember you saying you were using tubes. You were using like Helios tubes?
Yeah, we used the Helios tubes a lot on the film, and we would always push those through something soft. I was looking at one of my diagrams earlier, and I think we were playing a lot through like 216. I used a lot of the Celeb 250.
Yep.
Yeah, through snap grids with the snap bags. I think that's what they're called. They're basic Chimera style light, but with their grid on it, which is fantastic. Because like I said, I wanted to use soft light. I wanted this to have a really great traditional soft wrapping feel to it. And I don't want it spilling all over the rest of the room. So those were really helpful. Just depends what we were doing. I mean, we're in some tight environments. So yeah, those tubes are also awesome because they have the grids for them as well. Mm-hmm. And you can use those as an eye light almost anywhere. They're fantastic for eye lights as well,
So talking more about interiors before we get to the exteriors and talk about the challenges of working outside in the winter. The factory. The factory's a big old set.
It was the inside of a former Nestle factory. So it was a former chocolate factory, and absolutely enormous. I mean, it went on for, I can't even imagine the square footage on this thing. It was absolutely enormous. And it was not heated because it wasn't a functioning factory. So you're in a giant concrete freezer for days on end because it was, while we were shooting, it got down to negative 36 degrees. And so take that negative 36 degrees and trap it inside a concrete block. So it was sort of pocket heating the factory because you couldn't heat that entire factory. So that was a challenge in itself, was doing that. And the factory floor set was enormous. They had to do a big build of all the machinery that the elves used to manufacture the toys. Mm-hmm. And so in looking for reference, because reference is a big thing for me, I it can be in my head, but if I can't explain it to the directors, they have to just guess what I'm looking to do. And I don't want any director to have to just guess what I'm doing.
Right.
So I found a video that was done to promote a fight that Canelo Alvarez was going to have. And it was this really great thing set in this boxing gym. And there was these amazing top lights just spotted down, and there was a ton of atmosphere in the place. And I was like, okay, that's what in my mind this factory looks like. So that was actually the shot that I pulled for reference, and I leaned pretty heavily on. It's what I showed my gaffer, it's what I showed the directors, and I'll pull the frame and I'll send it to you so you can put it in your show notes or whatever. But
For sure.
that was something that I found because I wanted this factory. Felt like I was walking a fine line. I wanted the factory to have a warmth to it, but I also wanted it to feel industrial because in talking to the directors, they really, it was like industrial revolution. That's kind of what they wanted to do. They wanted it to feel like, you know, the leather vests and the guys going off to do their factory work. And
Right.
so we went for a bit of that, but at the same time, I didn't want it to feel like the elves were in a sweatshop because these elves are happy. They love what they're doing. So I was walking this fine line of trying to make it look moody and interesting and still have like a warmth to it. So that was the balance I was trying to strike, and I think we landed there because you never look at it and go, oh man, these elves are being tortured.
No, you know, it is funny you bring that up because you do get that vibe that they're kind of in like a dingier spot, but they're stoked. Like especially the main elf, Seven.
Yes, Seven.
He's really determined to let the military know, like, hey man, this is important shit we're doing.
Yeah, and that character's fantastic.
Yeah, he's
great. I think they do a great job, and the elves. Credit to the guys and the makeup department and really honing in because I feel like that's a really interesting take on the elves when people see what the elves look like. They're definitely more human than elf, and they didn't go like over the top. They didn't go, okay, we're gonna make them green and we're gonna make them all little people. They're more diminutive people.
Yeah.
And they have prosthetic ears and, you know, really great shoes and a more jaundiced makeup. But it's not crazy. It fits in with the whole directive of the entire movie, which was to take this fantastical story and ground it in the real world so that people can go along for the ride without going, wait a second.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, nothing feels fake. You know, it all feels believable.
That floor, and again, this is working with production design, like I said, is very important. So all those lights were sourced by the art department. You know, there's, I think, 36 China hats on that on the factory floor. And that provides the bulk of the lighting in that scene. We used spot bulbs, like exterior, like floodlights, but the spot version.
Like Home Depot
and there's
spot bulbs.
I purchased them at Home Depot myself. Anyway, there was 36 of those on the floor. And then we had some Image 80s pinned up, I think about 7 Image 80s, and then a bunch of par cans around the perimeter so that we always had a backlight when we weren't in the exact right spot. And then for the ground lighting, we would bring in larger bounces and, you know, hit something from the floor into the bounce and bring it back and then, you know, wrap around with a little something more.
Totally.
So that was pretty much the game plan in those sets, and a lot of atmosphere in those sets just so you could read those spots. It was important to me that you could sort of see the beams coming off those spots, and so that the backlights had a little more pop to them.
Because they were supposed to look like, I guess, industrial instead of theatrical.
Yeah.
Like legit, just like, what would you call it? Factory floor floodlight.
Yeah, so everything, I mean, I did not go out of my way to keep lights out of the shot in the factory floor because they all felt, you know, natural to the environment.
Yeah.
Which is nice when you have an environment like that. It's not like when you're in a house and you can't have a par can in the background in the shot, right?
Totally.
With this, you have a little more leeway. There's a little more creative freedom.
How often do you find, you know, LEDs are obviously the wave of the future, but how often do you find yourself just using regular old Lecos?
You know, it's generally when you got a longer throw, when you have something like that factory floor like that. The LEDs, at least for the price point that you're operating in and the number you need on something like this, is not going to be very effective. So when you need that longer, harder throw, they tend to be still the choice. If you're working inside in a smaller environment, you can get an LED light that'll do virtually the same thing.
Sure.
Like Aperture makes some great lights, but even those don't have the punch of a standard tungsten, you know, or incandescent par can or Leco.
The factory's built underneath the barn. I'm assuming the barn and the factory were not. I'm assuming the Hershey plant wasn't under a barn.
It was not. You are correct. And that was really interesting because that barn itself on the property was just a plastic hard shell top with metal frames on the outside. So it was wide open to all the sides.
Oh, wow.
So the art department had to come in and face that barn and add sides to the front, to add sides to it. And we had to create a ramp that looked like it was going down into this factory. Now, Canadian government regulations only allow the art department to dig down 4 feet without some sort of permit and scaffolding and stuff like that. So there's literally only a 4-foot ramp. So the actors could only go down 4 feet. So they built up another 4 feet and framed the top of it. And then at the bottom, we put green screen in. So it's literally like, if you saw the dailies, it's hilarious because they would walk down and they would have to stop at a certain point. Or I think it was Walton or Mel or one of them went and walked straight into it. It was really funny. But it's basically, that's just tubes. That's tubes behind the beams lighting a green screen. And for a 4-foot walk down, you know, I think it was maybe a 10, I don't know how long the walk is. Maybe it was 8 to 10 feet going down. And then they built inside the Hershey factory, they built a full-scale ramp. So there was actually a, I don't know, probably 15-foot high ramp inside the factory that ran probably a good 40 feet. And we married the two together. And in those, I used these sort of like industrial sconces that are more like architectural lights. And I used those to bridge the barn down into the factory. And those run down the factory ramp and all the way throughout the factory. So the factory inside is kind of staggered. It's got these sconces to the sides, and then it's offset with China hats in the hallway. So it goes 1 in the middle, 2 to the side, 1 in the middle, 2 to the side. And part of my reasoning and logic behind that was I knew that a lot of the time when we were in the factory, we were looking at the elves. And if we were going to be looking at the elves and I wanted any sort of interesting bokeh or anything interesting in the background, I had to have something down on their level, because you were not really going to see those China hats, which, you know, on a regular sized person, you know, you might be able to look up a little bit more into them. So I had to have lights that played at different levels in there.
And you're talking about those like kind of cage bulbs, right? You've seen them in films. I can't quite remember what they were.
The ones that I have, I believe, were more so they're the angled face. It's like a glass angled face with a hood that comes out just a little bit over it. If you, and then they can angle up and down like this.
Gotcha.
So yeah, they're on the ramp and then they run throughout the factory. But that was something that where the whole movie was supposed to be, like I've already said, grounded in reality. I wanted it to be No Country for Snowmen, like I told you before. And that was sort of my directive to my crew, was like, we're making No Country for Snowmen. This is a real movie. This isn't fantasy.
Right.
So in bridging from the real world down into the factory, I wanted a little hint of that magic. So when he goes into the barn feels like a little more Raiders of the Lost Ark than it does No Country for Old Men. And then you get down to the factory and it's even more fantastical, but still in a weird, oddly grounded way. The most Christmas I think you ever feel is very early on in the story, when this actor Sean is coming down the street to sell a baseball bat that he got in his childhood to the skinny man. And there's carolers outside singing, and there's a crowded, like, bustling street where there's people Christmas shopping. And I feel like that is our biggest single glimpse into Christmas. That, and then Billy's foyer, where he has the Christmas tree and all the wrapped presents, and you know.
And he gets the rock.
Which, by the way, you should always talk to the art department before you touch the coal, because sometimes the coal is freshly painted and it gets on your fingers.
He's sitting there. That's
something I learned on this movie.
You were saying that you couldn't walk around the snow, like, for certain shots. What was that sort of dance like? You know, having to manipulate or having to work around your own behavior as well as the snow, the sun, the weather.
Yeah, in doing, especially the final, there's a big confrontation at the end between Chris and the skinny man, and it was going to take place over 3 or 4 days. And I knew, shooting in Ottawa, the weather's not like it is in Vancouver. In Vancouver, you get long stretches of overcast where you can shoot things with more consistency. In Ottawa, day to day, hour to hour, it changed.
Yeah.
So that was something that was really on my mind going into pre-production, trying to figure out how I was going to combat that, especially on a scene that takes place in 5 to 7 minutes on screen, and it takes place over 4 days in real life. So I talked to a bunch of different people. I went over it with my gaffer, my key grip. I talked to other DPs. And it was one of these things where I knew that I couldn't control it the way that I wanted it. It would have taken construction cranes and massive, massive overheads that we just didn't have the budget or time for. Sure. So I had to be a little more nimble and a little more creative. And it became more of a game of exposure and picking my angles. And the directors were really awesome in the fact that they understood what I was up against. And so we decided to shoot in sequence because we saw that the weather was going to arc in a pattern that felt like it would work with the continuity of the scene. So the scene starts in overcast, then it goes to snow, then it gets a little bit brighter back to overcast, and then it goes to full-on sun. But because it happens in a sequential order and it's not jumping back and forth between one side being snowy and the other side being bright and sunny, as you watch the scene, it transitions pretty seamlessly.
No, absolutely.
So
Like I thought that scene was shot in a day. I thought you just knocked it out.
I'm really glad to hear that. That means we won.
Yeah.
But yeah, that kind of stuff where we didn't have the money and the time for, like I said, for big overheads, and we didn't have the budget, I assume, for giant sky replacements to replace an entire scene worth of sky. So it was just being nimble and going back to our indie roots and going, okay, this is the way we're going to do it. We're going to game plan for it. And it worked. You know, obviously when we got into closer up stuff, we could use some overheads, smaller overheads, because you'll see when that standoff starts, it's like the Sergio Leone Western, the shot pushing through the gate, coming from behind Walton. You see Mel standing on his side. Then we turn around, we look the other way. There's beautiful, epic wide shots. But there's no room because you can't disturb that snow. Even though I had, you know, a fly swatter or two, the reach it would have taken to get to where we needed to be without disturbing the snow, it was impractical. So I said, all right, let's find another way to do it. And we did.
So there was no no VFX snow replacement at all. You just dealt with it.
No, we went with it. We didn't disturb the snow. And then there is a little bit of VFX snow to even out the snow throughout the scene. But otherwise,
Like from the sky.
From the sky, yeah. And actually even landing on the characters, it's really interesting. It's amazing what the VFX department did as far as that goes.
Yeah,
So that was,
I would not have guessed that.
and it's good. I think that lends, a lot of that is because we did as much practically as possible. And then that's sort of like the cherry on top just to even it out, which is
Sure.
the way that you'd want to do it.
Yeah. Are there any shots or setups that you're like particularly proud of, or maybe like challenged you in a way you didn't expect?
So there's a scene in the movie where Chris is getting ready to go out and deliver the presents on Christmas Eve, and I think it's one of the first times that you really realize there he is. He's Santa. He's got the coat on. He's got the hat on, and it's
that
an
costume,
emotional.
by the way, is awesome.
It's amazing, right?
Yeah.
Like the downplayed color. That was a discussion I had
leather.
with the directors. And yeah, the directors were all about like muting that color and making it more of a burgundy. And so we all had this discussion, the wardrobe department, myself, the directors, and they just crushed it.
Yeah.
And so he's getting suited up. He's just had like a really difficult phone call where he's trying to solve his problem. He can't get it done. And so he's suiting up to go out, and he's having this heart-to-heart conversation with Ruth, played by Marianne Jean-Baptiste, who is just amazing in the movie. I mean, their chemistry is phenomenal. And it's just one of these really endearing moments where you see like his plight. He doesn't have the answer, and now he's going out to do the biggest thing that he does every year, and it's heavy on his heart and it's heavy on his mind. And there's this moment where he stops right before the door and he says, "Because I failed." And then he walks out. And I just remember everything. It was just one of these things where I got the lights in all the positions I wanted. And I just feel from the time he comes down the stairs, it almost feels like it's not one shot, but if you watch the scene, it almost feels like it's one shot. He comes down the stairs, he goes into the living room, he gets his coat out of the thing. We're looking at Marianne in a close-up. We come back, but it feels so nice, so warm. You know what he's about to go out and do. And then he gets to the door, and there's this light that's just right down the middle of his face where it's got this beautiful wrap to it. And he's in profile, and he just delivers that line, and it's like, oh man. So that was a moment where I was really, really happy. You know,
Yeah,
there's a couple moments. The flip side of that too is the Friday of the first week, we did a big night exterior where it's the continuation of the scene. It's the other half of it where he walks outside and Marianne comes trailing behind him. Mm-hmm. And we had a big snow machine and we had big fans, and it was just a big night exterior setup where, again, I did the same thing I did from the interiors where I put a fly swatter up with a big ultra mounts, and I took my lights from ground level and pushed up into it and just did like a big soft return, and it just looked beautiful. And then deeper in the background behind the barn, he's going out to the stable where the reindeer are. There's another condor back behind there playing our backlight, illuminating the whole scope of the land. Mm-hmm. And that was one where it was something about that was magical. Like I said, it was our Friday of the first week. and I saw it. Like I saw everything so clearly, and it was just so pretty, and it just felt so magical. The fake snow whipping and him walking out. And my favorite part about this is we wrapped, and I was just like, I was just I was up here. I was just so happy with the way the first week had gone.
Sure.
The directors, they're big huggers, and they were giving Mel a hug. And I just jumped right in. Mel doesn't know me at this point. I just gave Mel a big hug. I think I surprised him, but it was great. He's a great guy, and
Yeah.
I think everybody was just excited how well it was going and how great everything looked, and the performances were just fantastic. So, yeah, that was one of those moments.
It's really cool to especially like with a relatively simple setup. I mean, takes some execution, but relatively simple setup to make something that makes you like excited on the inside. When
Yeah.
like how, obviously as a cinematographer, you have to absorb light that you see in nature, but how often do you just catch yourself just like taking mental notes?
Mental notes are good, but I find myself now, because everybody has a camera on them at all times, I find myself just pulling out my phone and just taking pictures so that I can reference it back at some point in the future. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've done this. The alleyway down by my trash can, by the dumpster downstairs, gets this beautiful light cutting through it in the late afternoon. And I was down in the garage the other day playing hockey with my nephew, and I took a picture of the dumpster because the light cutting through was just incredible.
Yeah.
And I'm like, at some point I'm going to delete this off my phone, because why do I have a picture of a dumpster on my phone? But it was one of those mental things. It's the same thing, like down in that same hallway, that corridor, the building has these lights and wood posts that come out of it, right? So at some point in the afternoon, those wood posts get the beautiful long shadows. And I can't tell you how many times I've just taken pictures of that.
Yeah. The our parking garage has the same, I think we catch the same light, and it's just like, but this is the thing that, like, if you want to film that, you've got 10 minutes.
Which is why I'm really fascinated by the digital LED walls, like doing virtual production, because if you can get into volume and you can have that light for 12 hours, I mean, get out of here. Like that to me is incredible. And that's something that I'm really, really interested in right now.
I mean, that's 100% the future, especially, if we're going to be doing all this COVID filmmaking for the next year, like, if you've got an in with like even a small volume, because I don't know if you've watched the Mandalorian behind the scenes stuff, but like, they're only building like a little bit of set, and then the rest of it, like even in the first season when Mando and the kid go to that hut that Gina Carano's in, the whole hut is volume. I thought they at least built the walls. No, it's volume. Right. It's all volume.
It's absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
I have a friend that I went to college with who's a DP, and he shot an indie romantic comedy, and they did the driving stuff in a volume. And I don't know that I need to talk to him. I don't know the exact reason why they did it, the reasoning behind it. Maybe it's because of the time of year it was snowy, and maybe it was conditions. They didn't want the actors driving, and I don't know. And there is almost a head-on collision with a semi, so maybe that played something into it, so they didn't have to put the actors in that situation, but it looked great.
That's the Fincher move. Like, once he built that process truck, that van with like, it's got like 18 Reds around it, and they were just driving around DC. I think it was for House of Cards, Mindhunter. And they just did everything on set. They're like, fuck it, why would we go outside, do a process? Like, just plop them down.
Oh, believe me,
you get the reflections.
Yeah, we did process trailer on this, and if there's a way I could have been in a volume instead, 100% rather do that. Yeah. Because no matter how quickly you think you're going to work on a process trailer, it's everything grinds to a screeching halt every time you have to change an angle, every time you have to change a vehicle, every time you have to change an actor. Like it's not a fun process.
What's the lighting situation like on a trailer? Do you just like send it, or were you pretty conservative?
No, the process. I ride obviously up front with my monitors, and I'm in control. I always have an iris control for A and B camera in front of me at all times, so I can make minute adjustments, or there's times where I'm actually doing a full iris pull on a move. So with that, that's usually an HMI off one of the corners of the process trailer pushing through, and then again, it depends where the shot is, but you may be bringing negative fill inside the vehicle. You may have the shot may cut off here from the driver side, the fill side, and you might be bringing something into right here to wrap it.
Totally. Going back to working with Mel, obviously, legendary actor. I'm pretty sure he's directed before, hasn't he?
You may have directed once or twice.
I think he has. So what was it like working with him? From like, did he give input, or did he sit on acting, or did he kind of give little like tips here and there?
He's amazing, man. He is a wealth of knowledge. I mean, he's been doing this since before I was born.
Yeah.
And the fact that he, won an Academy Award for Braveheart, was nominated for Hacksaw Ridge. I mean, the guy is just absolutely incredible and an amazing director, one of the best out there. So I always tried to keep an ear open. I tried to listen to what he was doing. But by the same token, I knew that I had to be 2 steps ahead of any time, because if I wasn't 2 steps ahead, I knew who would know. I mean,
Right.
he knows my job probably as good as I know my job, when you've been around it as long as he has. So that was one thing that I really concentrated on was listening to what he was saying, especially the directors. But he's very respectful. He worked so well with the guys. I never felt like he ever tried to overpower or anything. They had a strong vision for this movie, and he signed up to go with their vision. He was good about, if he had a thought, absolutely. And it's always worth listening to a thought when a guy like that is laying it out there.
Totally.
But as far as being overpowering or, no, he was an absolute pleasure to work with. Ate lunch with the cast and crew every day. The guys would cut him after he was done, and he would still hang out on set outside. That was one of the things that I'll never forget. Like, they turned around and they're like, "Whoa, what are you still doing here, Mel?" He's like, "Oh, I'm just they're like, we cut you, right? You don't have to be out here." And he's like, "No." He's like, "You guys are out here. I'm gonna stay out here with you guys."
That's
and
awesome.
it wasn't like I don't trust you. I'm looking at you. I'm watching what you're doing. It was like, I'm part of the process. I'm here. I'm going to show everybody I'm here in solidarity with you guys. So that was really great. A great message to the cast and the crew that, if Mel is going to do this, you better be tough. You better hang with us.
Totally. And you got to imagine, like, you've been doing it this long, like, you got to love it. Hanging around is probably enjoyable. It's not like
there's no doubt in my mind that he loves it more than anything.
Sure.
At this point, if he didn't want to do it, he wouldn't have to keep doing it. So I think he just truly enjoys it. And like I said, he was a wonderful presence on set, as was the whole cast.
Yeah.
You got Walton, who is intense as can be at all times. I think part of the cast and crew took to just calling him Skinny at all times, because he's a method actor, man. Like, there was times where he would partially answer you as Walton and partially answer you as the Skinny Man, and yeah. So he was a little more intense in his process,
Sure.
but just a terrific actor and a really great guy.
That's awesome.
And same with Marianne. Marianne is, if I could get a Calm or whatever that app is of her reading me bedtime stories, she just has the most pleasing voice I've ever heard, and is talented beyond words and just sweet on top of that, which is amazing.
Yeah, you already said it, but it has to be stated, like, their chemistry is fucking perfect.
Yeah. So there's a moment in the movie where she brings a file folder out to him while he's hitting a punching bag. And then he comes back in, and they have this moment in the kitchen.
Yep.
And it's such an amazing moment, because I feel like I've been married for 12 years. And I feel like it's an honest, heartfelt conversation that my wife and I could have had ourselves. Mm-hmm. So the writing is tremendous in that scene, and their delivery is just phenomenal. Like, you buy it. There's never a part of me, and I think most of the audience who sees this, that ever doubts that relationship.
No, absolutely. Yeah, it's genuinely like for so much anger going on in the film, that every moment with the two of them is just a shining beacon of love.
Yeah. There's an amazing emotional core and heart to this movie.
Yeah.
It's a thriller about a hitman killing Santa Claus, sent by this bratty 12-year-old kid. The kid who played him, Chance Hurstfield, was absolutely fantastic. I mean, he went from being like this Machiavellian little shit in one scene to, at the end of the movie, he's nearly dropping tears. Yep. And he's really good. And I think that he's going to have a really big career down the line. So working in an environment like Ottawa, an environment that I wasn't familiar with and had never been in before, in shooting and snow, you're dealing with just this bright white sheet, and you got to figure out how you're going to expose your actors against it. So like we talked about earlier with the negative contrast, I had to figure out what the negative fill. I had to figure out a way to create contrast between my actors and the background. And you realize right away the amount of light it would take to pump the actors up above the background is just insane, and it feels so natural that it's not the way to go. So when I was testing, I was doing camera tests early on, And I realized when I put my actors about a stop to a stop and a half below key, there was like this reverse contrast where all of a sudden they were popping out, and it had this really great look. And since I knew we were doing a thriller action movie, dark comedy, it was the way to go. And so I was really excited when I realized that I could get that contrast and it fit completely with what we were doing. So that was something that I concentrated on trying to do as often as I could.
It's all about contrast. The all of filmmaking is all just about contrast
100%.
in its various forms.
Absolutely. So yeah, that was something that I'm glad that, and that's where testing comes in. And if you have the time to test, otherwise you have to figure out in the first couple days what the hell you're doing, and hopefully, you haven't shot so much that you can't still keep a consistent look.
Yeah.
But in this case, I had done those tests, and it was always changing. Like I said, there was days where it was bright and sunny, like the first day when we shot, and Mel was shooting the cans off the fence. That was a day where, negative fill and softening the hard direct sun was important. And then you have days where Sean, like I said, the actor, was walking down the street to go take the baseball bat to Skinny Man, and you have soft, beautiful overhead light with snow coming down. And then in that case, you're trying to either walk some sort of negative fill alongside him along Steadicam, or if the wind is too hard and that proves difficult, you're picking the angle the best you can to get the best lighting and the best shape on him. But when he's landing in a close-up, then you're bringing something in. I think in that particular case, I had somebody with a bounce that was moving in to get him when he landed in his final position. There's a lot of that too. You can get an eye light with a bounce. When you're exterior daylight, you just, even if it's not pushing a lot of light into the actual face, sometimes it's nice just to have that reflector there just to get a little something in the eyes. And, with sun too, a lot of times you're looking at harsh light coming from above. So you're doing the little bit of an underfill.
There's little things like that I think only come from experience.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of trying to work with the natural daylight. I try whenever I can to make my exteriors a grip show versus an electric show. Sometimes you get in situations where you need huge lights, but I'm always of the philosophy, if I can make the natural daylight work for me, I'll do that.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we did on that shootout. Because once you start adding giant things, especially giant overheads, you just start slowing things down. And I never want anybody looking at me going, okay, we're going to miss our day because of you.
Right.
Because I feel an obligation and responsibility to myself, the directors and the producers, to come in on time and on budget and still make it look beautiful. So you got to be resourceful, and you got to figure things out.
Well, and that too is a lot easier, like we were saying with digital cameras now. Like you can use bounce and neg way more than you could back in the day when you needed the power of a light pretty much everywhere.
As an example, in film theory, you can go back and you can look at older movies, especially black and white movies, and just look at the quality of the light and see how hard they had to pump light just to get exposure. I was watching a scene from something the other day, and it was a Western, and there was a woman at the window, and it felt pretty natural at the window, but as soon as she turned around, you saw as she came into the house, there was a couple pockets of light that she walked through that they were just pounding, like, because you could see the hard shadows that are nothing like the light that was coming in the window.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, we're fortunate in the fact that we have higher ISOs than we did, years ago. And so you can do some really interesting thing at low levels. But then again, there's a scene in here that I'm really happy with where Walton is on a job and there's a couple sleeping in bed and he's in the bedroom with them. And that scene, I pumped the hell out of the light. If you walked into that bedroom, it looked like broad daylight. And if you watch it, it's one of the most contrasty scenes in the film. And it's because I ND'd down. I'm shooting wide open, even though my stop is, deep, just because I got this amazing contrast that you can't get otherwise. When you're lighting at really low light levels, you're not always getting the contrast that you want. And that's what was important to me in that scene. I wanted a heavy contrast. And if I'm just barely have my levels up, I can't really push one way higher than the other and get the background to fall off. So I was hitting Walton really hard. He had an overhead, and then I was blowing a light in through the window, which this was one of my favorite things because it's screaming on the window. It's night, but there was a mirror on the wall, and it hits the mirror and it throws across the other side. So I have these two amazing pools of light behind him, plus the light he's in, and it just worked really well. But if I had tried to do that at a really low level of light, stuff starts to get milky and noisy. With this, I was able to control my contrast, get really deep blacks, and make it feel really spooky. There's the shot before he gets into the bedroom. He's walking down the hallway, and I did this with Walton wherever I could. His shadow precedes him. So if you look in the movie, when he's coming down the hallway, you see a big shadow dropped on the wall until he gets in there. When you see him in the basement with Billy in the next scene, I believe we see him in, he's coming out from behind a furnace. You don't know where he's coming from, but a shadow comes out before he comes out. So wherever I could drop Walton's shadow before he got there, I did. And this is one that I love. And this is, what you talk about, like watching natural light and watching things unfold. One of my favorite moments in the movie, he's in a parking lot in broad daylight outside a convenience store. And there's a little boy and he's hanging out the window of his car with an airplane that he got from Santa. Walton crosses the camera and goes out of frame, and you see the kid and his dad, and the dad leaves and the kid is left, and Walton's shadow is falling right on the driver's side door. And it's so ominous, but it's one of these things where I saw it in the rehearsal and I'm like, Walton, you got to stand right here because look at what your shadow's doing. It's like, that's what I'm fucking talking about. It's like he got all jazzed and I was like, yes. So that was cool. He got all fired up. And when an actor gets fired up like that, it's super rewarding. You just feel good about it. So yeah, it was sort of like a motif. There was at least 3 times where his shadow led him, which was really cool.
The image is not complete in the camera. It's complete in the DI. So
Sure.
what was the relationship like with your colorist?
As far as post goes, it's really cool because we have a great relationship with J. Cody Baker, who's over at Company 3, and he did color for us on Small Town Crime. And he works lightning fast and he gets it. He got both times exactly what I was trying to do. And so going in to do Small Town Crime, I was a little more apprehensive. I get a little more apprehensive every time I go in with a new colorist. And the experience I had on that movie was awesome because I really, really, really focus on my LUTs, and I do live grade on set to get things as dialed in as I can. And so when we got into the final grade, it's not like he was pushing to throw it out. We put the base LUT on that I had crafted, and then we refined from there. And it works really well because he's got great instincts. He understands what myself and the directors are going for, and he'll offer suggestions on things, which is what you want in a collaborator. That's what I want in every collaborator I work with. I don't care if you're the third grip. If you got a great idea, tell me. It's my job to vet those ideas and get those best ideas on screen. As I said earlier, once in a while you'll get into a situation where you end up at a location that you haven't been to, you haven't tech scouted, you haven't location scouted. You're not unentirely prepared because you always should be, mentally prepared to attack something you haven't seen. So in this movie, the convenience store, the exterior of the convenience store was one that we had not seen. It was a last second addition. And Walton's character, it was my directive to always keep him as contrasty as possible. And now I got there and I look and the sun is blowing directly back into the front of the building, which means he's going to be completely front lit. And I'm like, all right, how do I put a spin on this? And how do I make this interesting? Because that's not who I built the character up to be. And that's where I was talking about he walks around the car and his shadow drops. So we get the shadow, which is cool because that ties to his character. But then I was like, okay, this is what I need to do. What I want to do is, because there's a shot where we're inside the car looking out and the kid is playing with the airplane and Walton steps in. So what I did was I fired directly back in the sun. So when Walton steps in, it's that flared backlight and it just sort of like for a second blows out and then dips in and he's underexposed to that. And it just had this great contrast. So like you're saying, your instinct as a filmmaker, especially young filmmakers, are like, how am I going to do this? But it was one of those things where just years of experience told me, okay, put him in a hard backlight. He'll cross into it. You'll get an interesting flare. He'll be slightly underexposed to the background, and it still stays in continuity with what I was trying to do with his character.
Yeah. So that is it for the interview with Johnny Derango. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you to Johnny for sitting down for the length of time that he did. And like I said, if you'd like more interviews, just let me know, and I will endeavor to make more if this weird sort of halting, mumbling way of getting through questions is somehow enjoyable. So that's it. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.